videos. So here we are, Becky Powell. I don't know how many have met her before. She's a project manager at the National Trust, a very senior project manager. Yeah.
We will buy.
Yeah. Specialising in rivers and landscape restoration. She comes from Durham. Great place. Spent her childhood on family farm, exploring everything natural. You told me I had to say something about throwing an orange into a stream. You're going to talk about that?
I am.
She ended up on the path that took her into the restoration of rivers. She's worked at the National Trust since 2017 and overseen many exciting projects, but seems to have a special place in her heart for Ullswater, which is nice. And she was heavily involved in the restoration of Goldrill beck, which we'll, I'm sure, hear about today. And also she's been engaged with the partnership with CIC. We heard from Maddie and David here today, working together to actually, as Maddie told us a month ago, lift the 2024 River Prize. So
I can tell you again.
you're going to say later on. Maybe. So it's actually a pure coincidence that Maddie spoke about a similar subject, although the main focus of her talk was her family, of course, touched on river restoration management. So on that note, without more ado, welcome to Becky. Thank you.
So, thank you for having me and for inviting me to come and talk. It's really nice to come and talk at events and evenings like this because quite often it's a different mix of people to those that I mix with in my day-to-day job, and I really enjoy that side of things. So thank you for inviting me. So, as Tim said, I'm Becky. I work for the National Trust. I started with the National Trust in 2017 actually to carry out a project in the Derwent catchment in Borrowdale, and then the old property manager at the time, Jeremy Barlow, said, oh, we've just got this little thing that we've been thinking of doing in Ullswater. You like rivers, off you go. And that was my introduction to Goldrill beck. But I quite like to start these things with telling you a little bit about myself, my background, and how I came to be in this world of river restoration. And yes, it all stemmed from throwing an orange in a river during a GCSE geography field trip when we had to drop an orange in a river and time how long it took to get from one point to another, and therein is born velocity. And as someone who didn't get on with traditional academia, I really enjoyed that, and it struck a chord and sort of was the birth of a fascination of rivers, which led me to university to study in more depth rivers and earth science processes. But with that, I'm from a farming family and pit mining family, and so was almost born with a love of the land and how it works etched on my heart. And part of the reason that I love what I do and part of what drives me is to see a world where everything comes together for a good output. It's not about one thing or another, it's about finding a good middle ground for everything. So we've been working on a project called Riverlands. Those of you who have engaged in Game of Thrones might know it as a realm, but it is a project in the Lake District which covers the whole of Cumbria, and it focuses on how we can achieve a healthy and beautiful natural environment which is sustainable, looked after and loved for and cared for by all of those people who encounter it. So this is my little team. All right, we are a little team, apart from Joe, he's 6'7". So this is what we've done across Cumbria to date. So we've done 6.3 kilometres of river restoration, and that's mainly been focused in the Ullswater catchment and in the Derwent catchment. We've done 35 ponds now. Some of them are more like swimming pools, but they're really big. They're focused on natural flood management and holding water in the landscape. Quite a lot of upland peat restoration, and the access improvements, it's not a lot, but they're access improvements in very difficult environments. So for anyone who has walked up on Armboth Fell between Thelmere and Borrowdale, we did the flagged path up there to deal with the peat erosion, and we've done quite a lot of raised boardwalks where we've set the river free and raised a path so you can walk above the water, and it's a really nice experience. We've been working closely with Danny for the last 5 years, and Maddie. We've been also working with West Cumbria Rivers Trust very heavily on community events. And we've reintroduced a species, black poplar, and I will come on to that a little bit later. And this is just sort of the overview of where we've been working. So you've got the Ullswater Valley there, 3 consecutive splodgers. Some projects planned in Ennerdale, a concentration around Borrowdale, and some outliers there. But today I'm really going to talk to you about these 3 red areas. So the pink that you can see on the map is the National Trust land that we look after. And the red outlined areas are the areas where we've carried out river restoration through the upper Ullswater Valley. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this is seeing that we've nearly sort of tackled the river on our land, and working with Danny, we've been able to extend the reach of that as well. So the middle splodge there, I will refer to that as Goldrill, even though most of it is Goldrill beck. That's what I'm talking about. This Hartsop Hall Farm, and this is Clyde Farm. For when I'm talking, that's what I'm referring to. So we came into this valley. Well, obviously we've been in this valley for a long time, working with our tenant farmers through various stewardship agreements and things like that. But we really came to look at the rivers in all seriousness after Storm Desmond, when really the conversation about river management and how we might look after our landscape in a way that might help us in the future and provide some natural flood management was starting to change. And in Ullswater, particularly at Goldrill Beck, the main driver was the A592. So this bit of road right here, which ended up, people might remember, with big concrete blocks and what we call rock sausages on top of. There was a cavity underneath this wall when we were designing this project that I went and visited, and I put my arm underneath the road and I couldn't touch any solid ground up to my shoulder. So there was a real risk to the A592 from continued powerful flood events that have become more frequent and more unpredictable. And people will remember Dunmail Raise and what happened there. And we were very concerned that a bit of river that was on our land and bordering the A592 might be powerful enough to bring the same consequences. So that's when we really started talking in earnest about what we might do to try and alleviate some of that. But for a little bit of context, we thought, well, how long has this river been like this? This map is from 1764 and shows all of the rivers in that upper part of the Ullswater catchment. So Wilf Brothers Water at Hartsop Hall Farm, and that stretched down by the road there as in that pre-restoration modified state. And I think we have to take a moment to doff our cap to the industry that went into moving such big rivers into really confined channels at the side of valleys, with nothing more than probably a pickaxe and a cart horse. So they've been there for a very long time, and this is the result of that industry is that we had very uniform, straight channels that have been continuously embanked and had gravel removed from them and really act as conduits of water and sediment down the system, move it down very quickly. There's that blockstone concreting and things I was talking about. So this is Goldrill next to the A592 there. It's the rivers work like this for so long, and then the beds start to erode, and the drainage between the field and the river becomes disconnected because the riverbed ends up above the field level. And they also transport sediment and water downstream very, very, very quickly and effectively to the next weak point in the system. And then this is the real beauty. This is at Parks at Full Farm. And the other thing with these embankments is we're getting farm tenants coming to us and saying, well, it keeps out so much of the flooding, but when the flood does get over them, the water never gets back in, and it's sitting on my fields for weeks before it can drain away. So that's a little bit of the rivers we were working with and what they were like. So there's a nice area with Goldrill Beck, and you can see the old river channel there. I mean, you'll all be familiar with it. And these drainage ditches, a lot of drainage was put in with the 1980s agricultural drainage grants, which paid an awful lot of money for extensive draining of floodplains for agricultural production. But unfortunately, a one-off grant doesn't equal ongoing maintenance, and eventually those drains start to fail. And if your river is higher than the rest of the floodplain, you're never going to win. So we looked at Goldrill and we thought, what could this be like? We took a really detailed drone flight, which had a resolution where you could see rocks down to 1 centimetre in size. And from that, we were able to do a really, really detailed topographic model of the landscape, and then we were able to rain on it, and we could see a really preferential flow pattern, which on ground truthing followed the lowest point of the floodplain through the field. There was an original plan at Goldrill to just remove this embankment here and dig a small chute channel out into the field and then let the water go and decide what it wanted to do. But for various reasons, ground investigation and things, that was deemed not the right way to go. So we excavated and dug the new channel. We were meant to do it originally in 2019, but we had to do a bit of ground investigation because there were reports that there was a previous burial pit from anthrax cattle on the site. So we had to do a lot of ground penetrating radar and make sure that there wasn't, because obviously that's not something that you want to uncover. And then in 2020 we were delayed, obviously due to COVID. So we eventually broke ground in 2021. And again, there's the before. You can see that concrete block work. That's where I could stick my arm right underneath the road and not touch any solid ground. So that was taken in early 2021, and there we are now. So that intervention increased the total length of the river by 1.6 kilometres. It included integrating this area of woodland into the river system. So we gained 2.5 hectares of wet woodland, 2.8 hectares of floodplain wetlands. That's not a whole floodplain, but pockets of wetland. And all of the agricultural ditches were left open and connected, but they were reprofiled or widened or wiggled a little bit. Because the reason we left them was they were full of really nice plants, macrophytes, and home to quite a lot of juvenile fish, so we didn't really want to remove them from the landscape. And we had a culvert running around here as well, underground, which we call it daylighted. Took the roof off it, and opened that up, and that's actually turned into a really beautiful habitat. So I'm hoping this will work. So we had a camera in the tree. It took quite a lot of editing to get a nice little short film, but it's quite nice to see that evolution of the floodplain suddenly becoming activated, and you can see large wood moving into the channel, and that tree that you saw coming into the channel in the first flood that happened is still in exactly the same place today. It's found a little nice niche for itself, and it's decided it will live there, and it's got all sorts of things growing on it, and we've got juvenile fish hanging out underneath it all the time, so it's lovely. So before I get onto the sort of the so what, we'll talk a little bit about Hartsop Hall Farm. Had a slightly problematic river system. It was failing, it was very straight, it had what we call a plain bed, or boring bed. There was no interest in it for fish or anything that might choose to live there. And a lot of bank erosion problems. So we spent a long time working with our tenant there to think about how we could do things differently, and we carried out what we call a constrained restoration approach, and that basically means that we retained the flood banks, but we moved them back within the fields. So we created more room for the river. That actually increased the resilience of the farm meadows to flooding, so they weren't getting so regularly flooded by summer floods and such. And we ended up with these big wide areas, which are great habitat. We'll talk about that. And then we were allowed to be a bit more radical down at this end. We call it the Brothers Water Delta. It's sort of the area of land that was once formed by the river as it spat out its load into the lake, and it gradually forms land moving out. And that had been very heavily drained by the river running down this side. So we carried out this project in 2022. There we are, the before, very heavily engineered, heavily modified river, and that's the after. So you can see we've still got the flood bank. This is quite close to after, so you can still see the footprint of the works that were carried out. But we've got these nice wide areas of what we call a wandering river system, and the joins, the confluences between the rivers are wider. And then we started to get water moving right out across this delta area. So we did 2.1 kilometres of river restoration there. That only resulted in 150 metres of new river length. But that's because of the constrained nature of the scheme. But the original river area, so the area that was underwater or wet, was 1,700 metres squared, and it's now 23,000 metres squared. So we've got over 1,000% increase in water dependent habitat for anything that might like it. So that was all looking really good. But so what? What about the rest of it? What about everything else we were looking at and hoping to achieve? So floodplain connectivity. You can see this is how it worked before in summer and in winter. and the jagged images are how it's working now. So we can see that there was a significant increase in floodplain connectivity, most notably through that lower wet woodland area, where there's a multiple thread channel network that is constantly changing, and we've got new channels evolving all the time. But in reality, the entire floodplain is regularly inundated in summer and winter, but it's easy up, easy down flooding. So it's not violent flooding. And it's much the same picture at Hartsop, where again, we've got a significant increase in the floodplain connectivity. And we can see the widened areas there showing your typical sort of wandering river system. Anyone familiar with Ennerdale or the Cairngorms, you can think of the River Feshie or the River Liza in Ennerdale. It's the same sort of thing. And then we've got this large area of very diffuse multiple channel flow happening down over the Brothers Water Delta area. Aquatic habitat. Geomorphologists did this, so they use words like biotope and brood, but it basically means habitat. So Goldrill was once just one long run, one long, very sort of not a lot of interest for different things that might live and make their home in there. And what we can see now is that we've got a big increase in different types of flow, and that means that with every different type of flow, a different thing enjoys living there. So we've got a lot of pools, which are good for fish, refuge areas for all different sorts of life stages of fish. And we've got a lot of riffles, really good for your macroinvertebrates and things like that. And we've got a lot of floodplain wetland, which is really good for our frogs and our toads and things like that. So we've got a huge increase in the different sorts of habitat associated with the river that's now at Goldrill. And it's the same, it's a really bad graphic, I'm sorry. But it's the same at Hartsop. You might just have to trust me. We've got a lot more pools. We've got a lot more riffles. We've got a multiple channel. The geomorphologists call it anastomosing channel network through the delta there. And it just the picture shows us that where we used to have this one long run, we've now got a really nice area of diverse habitat for things to enjoy. Gravel. Goldrill is very dynamic. It is allowed to erode and deposit as it likes. One of the key things about that scheme at Goldrill was we did it with an intention to never go back and do anything to it again. The river can just be for the rest of time, which means it can erode and it can deposit and it can be a bit messy. And the images show some of the evolution of that erosion. So here, this is just from the offtake, so where we brought it off the channel. You can see that it's eroded both out towards the field and also downriver. It's deposited a really big gravel bar, and that red area there shows a quite significant river cliff that formed. We have now got sand martins using that, which was really lovely to see. And this area here is really interesting because it was never meant to fill up with gravel, but it did it on the very first flood that happened. And it occasionally reconnects through erosion on this right-hand bank here, but it's just a sort of nice image of how these things are changing and evolving. But we've been able to quantify how much gravel's been stored over the whole site since we did this. Now I'm waiting for this year's figures, but over the first 2 winters of flooding, the site stored 2,300 metres cubed of gravel. So that would have previously been washed downstream and spat out at the next weak point, which unfortunately is usually focused around infrastructure. And really interesting that storage that hasn't happened in the channel, so on gravel bars in the channel, has happened within 10 metres of the channel. So we haven't seen gravel being left in the middle of fields or for a long distance away from the river. It's quite localised to the river channel itself. So that was really nice, and there's lots of nice little beasties that live there. It's crawling with spiders, which if you're of a slightly nervous disposition can make for some interesting site visits I've had with people there. Flooding. We monitored this project within an inch of its life, and that was with great thanks to Jeremy Barlow, the old property manager, who said, we need to know exactly what this means, have some money and monitor it. So we did, and we worked with Newcastle University to do that, and we put flow monitoring immediately upstream of the restoration and immediately downstream. So we were only monitoring that very specific 1.6 kilometre reach of the river. So they've been carrying out analysis of that data that's been collected. It covers 5 years of pre and post intervention, and that represents 250 flood events, various magnitudes. And this graph shows the response of the lower gauge in relation to the upper gauge. And you can see a clear shift. That's when we did the restoration. So you can see a clear shift in the response time between the two. And an analysis of this, a really sort of deep analysis that Newcastle University have been carrying out, has shown that prior to restoration, the flood peak was pretty much simultaneous between the up and the downstream points. And it's sort of at the extreme floods had an average of 16 minutes between the two. And now that average has increased to 41 minutes. And in some flood events, it's up to 90 minutes. Which has been really positive for us in showing that the site is slowing the flood peak. But it's doing, oh, I forgot the thing. It's doing other things to the flood peak as well. So this is the relationship between the upper and the lower monitoring points from a single event. And you can see that they both rise quite steeply. But there's a flattening of the peak at the lower gauge, and also I think one of the important things is that the levels stay higher at the lower gauge for longer than they do at the upper gauge, and that shows that water is taking much longer to move through the site than it previously did. And we can look at this across the whole data series, and you can see there now the difference in pre and post diversion. So this really does show here that we're getting this lowering of the flood peak and lengthening of what we call the falling limb of the hydrograph, which shows that the site's holding water up and it's taking longer to move through it. And we always said when we embarked on this will not stop a Storm Desmond. But what we hoped was we'd be able to demonstrate that projects like this, maybe that's a nice picture to look at. Projects like this can give people more time to prepare. They can knock the peak off. And they can slow the flow through one part of the system. And what we learned when we were looking at this restoration was that previously Goldrill Beck and Deepdale Beck had a flood peak that was simultaneous. So they came down at the same time and peaked together. And now, because of this, Goldrill Beck's flood peak is slightly behind Deepdale's flood peak, which just takes the pressure off the system a bit. So what about the stuff that lives there? I'm going to start with worms. We had some earthworm counts done, and the control count. So the first count, we had 7 adults and 2 juveniles. No one's been able to tell me how you discern between a juvenile and an adult earthworm, but I'm sure there is a way. Do you know? Told you I'd bring you in at some point. After we'd done it, we had 15 adults and 9 juveniles. So more than a doubling of the juveniles and a doubling of the adults. So something's going on that they like, and it I think is linked to a recovering soil structure through a natural flood regime and the cattle grazing. Soil organic carbon, carbon's big. We all like to talk about carbon storage and peat restoration and woodland, but actually floodplain wetlands are more effective and quicker at storing carbon than woodland planting. So we wanted to look at that. So the control, we looked at soil organic carbon and it was 3.6%. And after restoration in the floodplain wetland, it increased to 12.6%. So that's quite a massive increase in the amount of carbon that site's storing. Species introductions. I'm not going to tell you there's beavers there. We introduced black poplar to the site. So black poplar is the UK's native poplar tree. It's lovely. It's a clonal species, so it's a bit like aspen. And most of the poplar that we see in the landscape are clones of other species. And when it grows up, it grows on a wonk. They've got this really lovely lean that's very characteristic, and they're quite bushy like oak trees. They like having their feet wet, so they suffered a real decline when a lot of the valley bottom land was drained. And it's estimated that there's only about 7,000 individual trees left across the country. And the trees that we obtained were propagated by a chap in London who found a grove of 35 black poplar trees and went to great lengths to have them genetically tested. And that testing confirmed that it was likely one of the only known surviving wild populations of black poplar in the UK, and it was the only population with a ratio of 50 males to 50 females. So he propagated those trees, he cloned them on, and it's those clones that now stand in Goldrill. And the hope is we've got 20 at Goldrill and we've got 20 at a site in the Derwent catchment, and the hope is that we'll be able to propagate those on and develop a sustainable population of Cumbrian black poplar again. They are in the pollen record from coring, so they were once here, and it would be nice to bring them back to their former glory. Other things on Goldrill, we've got a really nice increase in herb and sedge abundance within the floodplain, where the flooding and the cattle grazing have disturbed the pretty dominant soft rush habitat that's there. So we've got lovely species assemblages that include red campion, oxeye daisy, wild strawberry, fairy flax, harebell. We've got marsh thistle and ragged robin, species that really like having their feet wet. And we do have localized colonizing communities of the wet-loving star sedges, bottle sedges, and sphagnum mosses. So these things are starting to come in and they're starting to colonize. One of the things that I'm most pleased with at Goldrill is that it's still grazed by the same cattle herd at the same numbers and at the same time of year as it was before we did the restoration. And that was really important to me. I wanted to show that we could have a natural wilder river working with farming without changing that farming system too much. And actually, I'd quite like the cattle to go on and graze it down a little bit more and trample it about a little bit more, because that soft rush is just not getting quite as much disturbance as we might like to see for some of those other herb communities to get away. At Hartsop Hall, that's the area down at Brotherswater. You can see again, that's quite close to when it was completed, because you can still see we've got a digger stuck there. You can still see the tracks there, but that's where we were allowed a bit more of a free rein to really spread the water out and allow it to go a bit bonkers. But the gravel areas in the wandering areas I was speaking of, they're being colonised by things such as foxglove, marsh marigold, bird's foot trefoils. They're romping away. But interestingly, we've seen quite a high count of cornsbury, which is an arable weed. And we delved into, well, where's this come from? Because it's come from the seed bank. It's been it's been brought from the seafront. And we think that that must have been there and dated back to mixed production systems on that farm during World War One and World War Two. That have since been lost. So it points to the fact that there was some arable production in the valley back then. On this delta area here, we've got an absolutely thriving abundance of Devil's Bit scabious, which has increased and is showing a really positive response to the wetter environment. And hopefully this will provide a base for a marsh fritillary butterfly reintroduction programme, which we'd like to see happen in the valley. Beasties. We've had small pell-bordered fritillary recorded on Goldrill that hadn't previously been recorded there. The same with great white egret and little egret. Dipper are using the site and we think are breeding there, but we haven't been able to quite track it down yet. We've got both snipe and jack snipe using the site. The salmon are definitely spawning at Hartsop. We didn't get any spawning records at Goldrill last year because the river wasn't in the place where it should have been on the map when the recorders went up to monitor it. But we know that we've got the backwaters on the site at Goldrill, especially in the drier times of the year, are absolutely teeming with salmonid fry. So trout and salmon. One of the things that I should have said about Goldrill and what we've found with the rivers in Ullswater is that there's a really interesting geology. So you've got your topsoil, and then you've got a layer of gravels, and then you hit clay. But that clay layer is only 8 to 10 inches deep. And once you go through that, you're into never-ending gravel and glacial till. And I said to the designer of these schemes, when we saw some really deep pools developing on Goldrill Beck, and then 6 to 8 feet deep, we had an 8-foot fence rail that we couldn't touch the bottom with in one of the pools. So how deep are these going to get? And he said, how deep's Ullswater? Oh, you're opening a can of worms there. But they're really deep and they're really important because these rivers do get quite low now in summer. And these really deep pools offer a fantastic refuge for fish because they stay cool, especially when there's not a lot of tree cover or shade across the rest of the rivers. But we've got fox, otter and deer using the sites regularly, and insects galore. My husband's an ecologist and he went and did some surveying at Goldrill because he's cheap last year for me, and he came back and he had about 50 mosquito bites on his leg. And he said, well, it's worked. So, and he's right, and the swallows and the house martins over there in the summer have just been fabulous. So I'll move on to Side Farm. Now this is an interesting project for us because we didn't give birth to it. We acquired it designed and took it through its delivery this summer. So this has just been delivered this summer. This is Goldrill Beck going down to Ullswater's just behind these trees. This was a breach in the embankment there. It originally had 4 design areas. So we were looking at this area here at Beckstones, well, Deepdale, this area at Beckstones, this area around the access track to Side Farm, and then this area by the fan. We didn't do that one, primarily because the overhead power lines run through the field and we didn't want to be responsible for knocking the power out to Hartsop. We thought that might not go down very well. But we did do the others, and these were all based on minimal intervention, maximum output type approach. So very small embankment breaches. So you can see, I've lost my pointer, I haven't pressed the wrong button. Here, this is the Ullswater fan. We took out about 20 to 30 metres of embankment around this corner to allow the whole bottom corner of this field, which would have once been a delta, to reactivate. We took out the embankment at Deepdale / Beckstones down here. And we did some ditch blocking in these fields here, and some pond creation. So this is during construction down at the Ullswater Delta. So again, Ullswater is just behind these trees. This is the embankment partially gone. And this is during construction at Deepdale. That embankment was 2.5 metres high in some locations and 4 to 5 metres wide. So it was a fairly hefty amount of material to move off the site. This is down at Beckstones now, so the river's widened, it's very connected to its floodplain. This is a boulder that the 13-ton digger that was on site couldn't move. So it's now a standing stone. That's now interacting really dynamically with this whole floodplain. So there was a permissive access, and there is still permissive access down through this field, but it obviously is now subject to a very different water regime. So we're talking to the property team now about how we can go about providing alternative access through here when this area is impassable. And this is the breach down at the Delta. This whole bottom corner of this field, the lowest part of the corner, the field is totally underwater, shin and sometimes knee deep, and it's flowing in a very nice blanket over there now, and it's starting to drop out gravel in places, and over time we'll see preferential channels start to develop. They've done a similar approach to this at Swindale, the RSPB have at Swindale Beck, I remember last year talking to Lee Schofield, the site manager there, and he said we've got salmon spawning in the middle of a field. And they love it. Salmon love floodplains. So there you go, there you can see the bottom corner of that field now, and there's Ullswater. It's connecting in a nice flow path, and that woodland's now quite wet. Some of those trees will suffer from that, and they will fall. That's kind of okay. They'll put dead wood into that habitat. We'll get rejuvenation. We'll get trees that like having their feet wet, coming back there. So one of the other things that we've been working really hard on in Ullswater is how we work in partnership. The biggest catalyst to that has been working with Danny and Maddie at Ullswater CIC, who do loads of great things in the community, and we've been trying to facilitate more of that through teaming up on grants, teaming up on events, teaming up on site visits. And jointly this year we entered the UK River Prize, and I was going to show the video, but I'm worried that people won't be able to hear it. So if we'll have to do a little test. If you can't hear it, shout.
So Ullswater Catchment Management Community Interest Group Committee started in 2016 after the storm basement floods of 2015. And it started as a small community flood action group and then developed into the CIC, which was formalised in 2018. Well, I think we're very proud of what we've achieved up throughout the catchment. And when we come back to look at work that's maybe a couple of years old, it's incredible to see what wildlife has returned, to see how the trees are growing, to see how it's changed the landscape, but in a good way. But actually, that we're also very proud that the farmers are happy with it and the landowners are happy with what we've done, and that they can see how this is going to benefit their farm and their futures as well.
I think the work that we do is important because we're demonstrating what's possible by working with landowners and farmers. And once you learn how to do that, you then unlock potential of the whole catchment and then working in a catchment reach, which is something that people have historically struggled with. I think it's just, I think what we're doing is demonstrating that we're working with partners, we're working with farmers, and that has enabled us to work at a catchment scale.
So in our partnership working with Ullswater CIC and the National Trust in Ullswater Catchment, one of the really good things about it has the way that the projects have evolved throughout river valleys, so that, you know, we're really developing that kind of catchment scale impact on the hydrology and the geomorphology of these river catchments.
Goldrill beck used to run next to the A592, and there was a real risk of the road being undermined or even collapsing. So in 2021, we allowed the beck to flow back through the lowest part of the floodplain, interacting naturally with all of the land around it, creating fantastic habitat, fantastic floodplain wetland, and removing the risk to the road infrastructure. At Hartsop Hall, we've used a different approach to river restoration, where we've had to work sensitively with the farm business there. So we've carried out constrained restoration, where we've moved the flood banks back, but we've actually increased the wetland channel area from just over 1,000 metres squared to 23,000 metres squared. This increase in habitat is so vital for everything that depends on this environment, but it's also providing some flood resilience for our farm tenant.
I think what's happening in this valley with the Ullswater CIC is just really, really exciting. It's not one farmer, it's not one person, it's a whole group of people, and we're doing things like the ponds behind me, things like the longer break rotational grazing in the background, just giving nature a chance to start to use natural processes. And it isn't abandoning our culture or our identity or our need to live in this place, it's just building on that and giving it a sort of really relevant new start, sort of reinvigoration of it. And I'm really proud of everything that we're doing, that Danny's doing, and the other farmers in this valley are doing collectively. It's profoundly making this place better, and it's exciting, and I'm proud to be a small part of it.
Working with Danny and Maddie at Ullswater Catchment Management CIC has allowed us both to achieve a lot more at a scale which we wouldn't have been able to on our own. So we've been able to create a landscape which is more joined up in terms of habitat, which is better for nature, and which provides people with more resilience in the face of climate change. Projects like this are so important for local communities in terms of having a resilient landscape around them. So from a flood, a drought, and a climate change perspective, this work is vital. But also for our natural world, which we know to be in crisis, this makes a difference. We're committed to continue our work with local farmers and land managers to make Ullswater a better place for people and for nature.
Sorry if that was a bit quiet, my laptop's flawed in terms of its volume ability. But as Maddie will have shared at the last one, we had a rip-roaring night when we lifted the UK River Prize, and also some farmers from Cumbria were recognised for the work that they've done with rivers. But it wasn't just the UK River Prize that we've lifted through efforts with the work we've done in Goldrill. We lifted the European River Prize, which was happened to be held in a palace in Vienna, which was nice for us. But these things, they're nice for us because this work is hard and emotional, and it's nice for us, but it's also really nice because it enables us to get the message, which we hope to be really positive about what we're doing, out into the world a little bit more. And we try to involve people in different ways in the projects that we're doing. So some of you will have been involved in the fish rescue at Goldrill, where we invited local community members down to ferry fish from between where we were doing the restoration to a point upstream. So this is done by electrofishing. You pass a current through the water, the fish are stunned, they float to the surface, you catch them. put them into buckets and walk them quite a long way along a field to release them. And that was a really nice event, and we got a lot of positive feedback from that, and we caught an awful lot of fish. We've really tried to get people to engage with the project since it's been done. So these are our sort of fixed point photo monitoring posts, just simple posts with an iPhone camera notch in the top, and an email address, and we still get 1 or 2 photos a week through to our email address from these photo posts, which is really lovely, because I thought they wouldn't work by having to do it by email. You've got to get home, you've got to remember. I'd struggle. I wanted a QR code, but at the time that was far too revolutionary. We've done some work with Patterdale School for one of the school classes to name the black poplars. So we've got a really nice variety of names. I'm fond of Gerald. Visit Gerald quite a lot because he's easily accessible. He's doing very well. Not quite sure how the lemon's doing. I haven't been there for a while. But we're hoping to bring this class back to site. This year we've had little plaques with the names made up, and they can get out on site, have their photo taken with their tree, and it's a nice thing. And that child might walk past that site in 30 years' time and something might just ring a bell, and you've just made a connection there with nature and with the natural world. We talk about what we do a lot. Sometimes the National Trust isn't too good at doing that. I'm not very shy about doing it. So we've done magazines, conferences, posters, newspapers, radio, and we did the lakes with Simon Reeve, which was one of the most joyful days of my career, despite the fact that I was 38 weeks pregnant at the time and went on maternity leave 2 days later. But it was a joy again. It put that message out to the world that what we're doing, it's bold and it's new and it's a big change in the landscape, but it can have an awful lot of benefits for people and for nature. And there's the little person, and that brings me on to I know that these talks are free, and people have a choice to make a donation. My daughter was born with hip dysplasia. If you haven't come across it, you haven't come across it, but it basically meant she had to be in a little harness that held her legs at a certain angle for 14 weeks to improve her hip joint, and luckily it worked. If it hadn't, she would have had an operation and gone into a spica cast, which is a cast from their armpits down to their ankles, which they remain in for 3 to 4 months. And there's a charity called Steps, which help families through that journey. So any contributions for tonight's talk, I know you kindly said that 50% of that could be donated to a charity of my choice, and that would be the charity of my choice. So that's me, and that's my take on what we've done in Ullswater.
Thank you so much. It's exciting to see the product of your work. I suppose you can wander past that site every year, every 2 years, every 5 years, and just see the wealth of change.
Yeah. I never sleep well.
No.
Whenever it rains, I wake up and wonder which one of my rivers has misbehaved. But
Can you just explain why Goldrill Beck was chosen? I think there was quite a large project that came out of it. Where did the pressure come for Goldrill Beck to be picked on?
it was a perfect storm of excuse me, of Desmond, highlighting a different approach to doing things. Danny and Maddie had started work at the time. It wasn't the CIC, was it? It was a local community flood action group.
Flood action group, yeah.
And our community, our area ranger at the time, John Pring, had been engaging with Danny and Rob through that. A change in farm subsidy came about, which helped us on the journey to this, and really we couldn't there was a huge drive for us around the road. But also, I didn't mention in my talk, because I kind of feel like it's not irrelevant, but the site is a protected site, so a site of special scientific interest, which was failing because of its morphology, because of its modifications. So if we were ever going to do anything there was just a perfect storm of circumstances that all came about at the same time, which provided the opportunity to go and do it, really.
You know, I'm going to ask you about the special bird as well.
Special one?
Special bird, everyone's waiting for.
What special bird? I've forgotten. I think I was talking about tonight.
Begins with an M. And then an S.
The one on your platform.
Oh, the ospreys. We put an osprey platform up. Because they feed in the valley. There's ospreys that have been seen feeding at Ullswater. But there aren't a resident breeding pair in the valley. So we took advice from a chap called Pete Barron on where to put up an osprey platform. We have, but they haven't taken to it. So it's on my list. Might have to have a conflag, because it might well be off our land, but we will fund another one to go up to try and attract a pair of breeding ospreys to the valley, because that would be lovely, I think, wouldn't it?
Any questions from? Yes, Simon.
Do you have any further sites or rivers targeted for doing similar projects, or?
Yeah, so I mean, really the work that we're going to continue doing in Ullswater is going to be around the wider land management. Again, in continuing that partnership work with Danny. So my main river focus, now that we've done the work at Side Farm, is shifted to Acorn Bank near Penrith. I'm looking at removing the weirs in Acorn Bank next year. And we've got, because we're Cumbria wide, I've got a project in Ennerdale on the River Liza, hopefully next year, and also a project in Little Langdale, upstream of Little Langdale Tarns. So that's sort of where I'm bothering next.
Anyone else? Yes, please.
Do you think overall you and others who are part of the whole process think of its value for money? Just thinking of the bigger picture stuff about how this kind of work could be rolled out perhaps a lot further across, not just in Cumbria, but further afield. You know, you've added it all up and then you start counting the worth of a dipper starting to breathe somewhere, or maybe more carbon storage, because that seems to be the zeitgeist at the moment. Is it sort of deemed value for money?
Just for the Zoomers, I don't know whether they will have heard it.
Just quickly refresh.
Yeah, very ask the question, is there work being done on value for money?
Yeah, not quantifiable work. I think we can look at it from a highways perspective and think that it's value for money, because they were repairing that road on a very regular cycle at quite low cost. So Goldrill, from start of design, all the modelling, all of the ground investigations looking for anthrax, all of the and then the actual work came in at £680,000, which in the grand scheme isn't a lot of money, especially when that's grant funded by, at the time it was grant funded by the European Union through the Environment Agency. The work at Hartsop Hall was a little bit more expensive, but that included two bridges. So you expect that level of infrastructure investment to be more expensive. The work at Side Farm was funded by the Environment Agency. That cost £52,000. So in terms of scale of intervention, you know, the Goldrill back in the Hartsop Halls, you're not going to see a lot of them in any one valley. You know, you could go to Borrowdale and go, I can see where there would be one Goldrill back that would work. But the rest of it's like the headwaters, the tributaries, the hedges, the tree planting, the ponds, and all of the wider array of things that we do in the landscape that makes it a bit richer, a bit more resilient, and stores carbon, which is the big thing, and it's not going to go away. But in terms of the economics of the value we put on things like a breeding dipper, people are trying to do it, but it's just not there yet. Because it's quite subjective as well, I think so.
Can you put a value on the flood management side? Is that?
So the National Trust as an organisation and as an entity, a charity, are working in the national team. There's people working with insurance companies to try and delve into that, but it's a bit of a dark arc. It's way above my knowledge levels.
Anyone on the Zoom? No, pose a question?
There's no questions yet.
No questions yet? Anyone within the hall? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the black poplar and the work you've done on that, which is really, really positive. And I just wondered if you've got any historical perspective on when they were lost and why they were lost. Was it just purely because of land drainage? And have you got any plans for getting it out beyond, these sites in terms of propagation you're doing?
So we just know that they were in the seed bank, and we do have clonal populations in Cumbria. But because they're species that like having their feet wet, they tend to be floodplain valley bottom dwelling species. So it's very likely that a lot of the loss of the local population came with sort of land drainage and intended like agricultural improvements. But that's not in the 1980s. That's probably going back much further, as we saw from that map, 1764. And they're not extensive across Cumbria in the seed banks. So there was a very distinct Eden Valley population in the historical records. So what we do have on the Goldrill site is we have a 50-50 male and female population. So we're hoping to see some natural regeneration across that site, but we will be trying to propagate on. We're just allowing them to establish and letting them bed in and get named. And then some of our rangers will be taking that forward. Hopefully, it would be nice to establish a community tree nursery at some point where that could be done. That's something that would be a really nice thing to do.
Anyone else?
I went to the National Trust AGM on Saturday in Newcastle, and this project was called out as an exemplar of what the exact trust would be. So that was to the whole of the people that were in the room, 3,500 people online.
That's nice.
Michael was saying that if you went to the National Trust AGM in Newcastle, then this project was quoted as an exemplar nationwide. Another question.
Not me when they're doing.
Another question, which links to Newcastle University and University of Cumbria. Do you have a really long-term program of research monitoring? Not just 2 years down the route, but a long process which allows university students to come and get involved as well as local individuals.
Yeah, so different master's students looking at the Newcastle University data output, but one of the things that I've just got funding for through the National Trust is now a research organisation as well as a charity. It's got a research arm, and every year they give out some seed funding to different projects to sort of start to set up different areas of research, and we've been successful this year in getting seed funding to set up long-term catchment comparison studies. So this is where we'll be looking at a catchment which is undergoing quite a significant change, and we'll be setting up a detailed monitoring network, coupling it with a catchment of a similar size and geology which isn't undergoing that change, and looking at a 10 to 15 year programme of monitoring to see how those changes impact downstream water flow, as well as the other things like species diversity and stuff like that. So we are starting to get into that world of longer term monitoring networks and research opportunities.
Yes, Becky, is there any plans to give more access onto these re-wiggle becks to further the education, etc., etc.? I mean, I know there's other examples in Cumbria where they are creating access over wetlands.
Yeah. So we've got access over a couple of the projects that we've done in the Doe, and as I said, where we've done the raised boardwalks, so you can walk on a river, which is really nice. There's permissive access at Side Farm. Hartsop has access. Goldrill is the key, where I'd love to be able to get access onto that site. However, that site has to work for the farm, and having that area as a field for cattle with no people walking through it is quite valuable to the farmer in terms of cattle trampling incidents and things like that. One of the things that we're really keen to do is try and there's a little mound like a bedrock outcrop as you walk along the footpath. I'd really like to try and get an access onto that with some steps to walk up so you can look down over the site with some interpretation. And it might be in the long term that we're able to get wider access across that site, but we have to protect it for the cows at this point in time.
More questions online or otherwise? Oh, okay.
I understand there's beavers, not very far from here. Would they have ever been this far up and is the climate suitable for them?
So they will have been, at one point in time, they'd have been really extensive. I don't believe there is currently the habitat in Ullswater that would support a beaver community. They would love the wet woodland at Goldrill Beck, but it's tiny, and we see beavers in enclosures that are that size. I don't personally, I'm not speaking for the trust, I'm speaking in personal opinion, I don't like that because they breed and they outgrow it, and you've got to manage that. They escape quite regularly. Will it be right one day? Who knows? But the beavers didn't evolve with the modified rivers that we've got, so there's a lot of work that I think needs to be done. There are certainly places in Cumbria where they could live quite happily. Ennerdale is probably your prime example of that, but they're fashionable.
Sure.
What I really like more than anything is waterfall, because they would have been very extensive. And part of the work that we've been working with Danny on through the species survival funding that we got was the mink trapping, which has gone great guns, I think, hasn't it, Danny?
Yeah.
Trapping quite a lot.
Yeah, 25 in this first year.
Yeah.
Still just finding out whereabouts.
Around the lake?
Yeah, between here and Matadale. And I haven't even moved down to Pooley end yet. So yeah, there's a lot more to go out.
Yeah. And there's different opinions on how many mink you can have and have waterfall. So at Ullswater, the RSPB work on it. If they trap a mink within a waterfall release site within a 2-year period, they will not release a waterfall onto that site. Whereas I was talking to a lady from Forestry England today who's releasing waterfall potentially into Ennerdale next year. And she's trapped 3 this year, but she's quite confident that they're not a resident population, that they're a transient population. So they've been young males, which she feels are young males branching out and trying to find a territory. And she's quite comfortable with releasing with that level of trapping. And I said to her about Ullswater, and then Danny messaged me and said he trapped 25, and she went, "Oh no, it's too soon." So, but it would be lovely, and they would have once been widespread, but the mink will have, you've got to give them a chance, and they'd obliterate them before they even got going. So I think it's those sorts of things that we should be looking at, because we have got the right habitat for them. Yeah.
I see the news this week that the Cumbria Wildlife Trust is releasing pine martens.
I saw that. I think that's brilliant.
I don't know how close they are to here. I don't know whether they're releasing the site information.
Grisdale.
Grisdale, yes, that's right. Grisdale.
South Lake, yeah, Grisdale Forest.
And the Dun, I think.
And the Dun, yeah, through the landscape recovery project there.
Forest.
Yeah.
Morning, talk to say a few words.
Thank you. Hi, well, thank you very much. Becky, that was. That's right. For that fascinating talk. I'm not going to keep you long. It's going to be a very quick vote of thanks because I know there's quite a few of you in the audience here tonight want to have a chat to Becky about various schemes that they might be able to launch themselves. Right, in terms of, it's been a great talk and it's been fascinating for me. I actually live at Halfstop. I will work on the neighbour to see about getting a bit better access. So I know we'll see what we can do. But to see it develop, and straight away you could see the gravel beds working, literally straight away. And I'm looking forward to seeing these poplars grow up. And it's been fantastic. In terms of value for money, well, we don't have to look too far away. Just look at TV screens last week in Spain and the floods there and the costs of that, which will run into millions and millions. So if this works, and we're looking forward to the proof, well, not looking forward to the proof in the pudding, we're going to need another storm, Desmond-like storm, to test it. But if it alleviates, I'm pretty sure Desmond cost Carlisle something like £30 million in damages. So if it stops one of those, then if 30 of these stop one of those, then great, well worth doing. So, and that's before we get the natural and nature benefits. So really, it's a no-brainer. And the other great thing about this project is the involvement of community and community involvement, because as we extend these, to get the community involved, as you well know, it is vital, and to motivate them, and so, but also for the community to come back and on a kind of when they want to basis and see the benefits, so that they will then be the encouragers for the next schemes that are being done and rolled out. So it was really good, the level of community involvement, and I know there's a lot of people in the audience tonight. Look forward to more schemes for you to get their hands muddy with, so that's great. And lastly is the celebration, and I think there is really something to celebrate. It was great to see you celebrating and the team celebrating. Danny there, who's put in a lot of the legwork as well, celebrating, and we can all celebrate. And on that note, I'd just like to thank Becky very much, thank Danny and his team as well, and all of your other assistants who can't be here tonight in the usual way. Thank you very much, Becky. So there's another thank you that we need to do this evening as well, because we've had a great run of talks once again, and that is really down to Tim here, who organises the talks, he finds the speakers, he does all of the coordination, he books the hall, etc., etc., etc. A lot of work goes in. You'd be amazed how much work goes into just getting these talks. And we are reaching right around the world now. I know there's people on the zooming in from the United States for one, and I know we've had people from Australia as well. So we get.
Become.
Let's not be doing a good evening. Yes, no, I don't think I can pique his interest. Talking to dead horse there. So Tim, thank you very much for organising all of this. And so for the Zoomers, without Anne on the technical side, we wouldn't get the Zooming done. So a big thank you to you, Anne, for broadening our reach to the Americas, and maybe next year, Mr. Trump, who knows? And thank you all very much for coming and for continuing to support. There is a donations, Tim, just over there. And
donations in the basket if possible, and for those who want to have a drink or something, there's another donation box there, so you can't escape without dipping into your pocket.
And likewise on the Zoom, there's a donations link on Tim's email. So we don't have the full programme yet in place for next year, but we do hope that you'll come back and enjoy some of the talks and the presentations that we'll have for you. So thank you very much for coming and supporting us. And I know it's a bit early, but if I don't see you beforehand, Merry Christmas.